And welcome, everybody. Nice to see you. Welcome to our monthly Zoom live learning. Below the Bible Belt, Judaism, Born Divided. How the hell did we get here? So it's really nice to see a lot of familiar faces who've been with me monthly, and some of you just joining us. Welcome. Wonderful. Thank you to Taylor, who's managing to hold this virtual temple up and running. And I'm pleased to be in learning with you all this afternoon from New York City. I had a very exciting night last night, even for those of us who couldn't care less about basketball. All right, that's me. It certainly felt like a moment in which people are coming together around a goal that's much bigger than little things. It made me wish and miss coming together in the public sphere around things that unite us less than things that divide us. So, greetings from New York City. Hello, everybody, wherever you are. I hope that wherever you are in good temperature and well hydrated and feeling grounded as much as possible in our mad reality. So, to help us ground wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, whatever temperature you're dealing with, whatever is on your news feed, I'm going to ask us all to actually take the next minute or so to just breathe. If it's helpful to close your eyes, let's close our eyes. Let the screens just hang out there as extensions of our being. Let's find the ground with our feet or with our behinds or with our backs. Just feel the gravity pull us, hold us. The simple state of being. As we feel our body connect to the earth, feel the breath leading us, holding us, breathing us, however and wherever you're feeling your breath right now. And in the space between the exhale and the inhale, find your intention for today. What is it that brings you? What is it that your soul needs today? What is it that your mind needs today? I can say that for me today, I'm looking forward to exploring with you how truth triumphs over censorship and how generations and generations can persist in pushing for peace, even when powers resist these aspirations. That is my kavanah, my intention on this day. And if you have one that you want to share, I'm inviting you to use the chat or just hold it in your heart. We'll have more chances today to share thoughts and feelings, reflections, and questions. And as a reminder to those of you who've been here and those of you who have joined us in different settings, we're going to take about an hour now to go over this month's topic, which is the book burnings and book bannings and can books begin civil wars? The answer is yes, but what can we learn about it? And then we'll take another 20, 30 minutes afterwards for questions about today's session. And clearly, we're talking about history, and we're talking not just about history, but also things that have to do with today's realities. So we're not going to tackle all of it. I know there's much pain on our hearts, and there are many questions. We'll tackle what we can and continue onwards. So I'm going to start with three quotes that in the study sheet that Taylor just dropped in the chat and will drop again. And this is also on the landing page, so you can go back and reference those anytime. Right there. Looks like a few of you are zooming in and out, but I hope everybody gets the footing, gets in the room, stays in the room. And I'm glad you all have your videos on your cameras. Thank you. That makes a big difference. We see each other's faces. So here's a couple of quotes. The first is famous from Heinrich Heine, famous poet, German poet of Jewish descent, who, though converted to Christianity, stayed very close to his Jewish legacy. And at one point wrote, where they burn books, they will ultimately burn people. And of course, this was 1821, and over a century later, both his books were burned, and some of his relatives in Germany. And so we're aware that book banning and book burning is not just recent history and not just a threat, but a terrible reality where ideas and the people who speak those ideas are sometimes attacked and killed with an attempt to silence them. Geraldine Brooks, the contemporary author, so of Jewish descent, wrote, book burnings, always the forerunners, heralds of the stake, the ovens, the mass graves. Be aware when books get burned. And to echo her, writing before, in 1979, Ray Bradbury's famous Fahrenheit 451, echoing 1984, wrote, there's more than one way to burn a book. And the world is full of people running about with lit matches. Every minority feels it has the right to censor what it dislikes. And you can argue with this quote and say not every minority, every majority feels it has the way as well. And sometimes there are laughable or terrible mistakes that need to be silenced or censored or questioned. The illustration that I've put on the top of the page is from a weird and wonderful item on our history. The Sinner's Bible, as it was known, was one of the early King James Bible attempts in mass printing that unfortunately we think was a mistake. It may not have been a mistake, which makes it even more wow. The 10 Commandments, you know those, and one of them is, thou shalt not commit adultery. Well, the Sinner's Bible in 1631 had thou shalt commit adultery. And when that was discovered in London, you can imagine the outcry. I don't know if, I'm having a moment. What is that show about the gossip sheet in London? Anyway, whatever. That was a Bible that was burnt and discontinued for its sexual, horrific sin options. But there were much more complicated historical examples of ideas that were deemed dangerous enough to be burned, silenced. And today we're going to look at two moments from Jewish history. One, the prophet Jeremiah, probably the year 601 BCE, as sort of Jerusalem is beginning its descent into the end, comes up with strong prophecies that are silenced. And we're going to look at chapter 36 in Jeremiah in its entirety. It really is worth it. And the second is a moment that happens before, a couple decades earlier, when Josiah, the king, decides to either write or reclaim or create religious reform that will most likely create the book of Deuteronomy and silence many other traditions. And I'm bringing these two stories a few decades apart from Jerusalem to talk about the ways burning books tries to silence a message or writing a book tries to silence a message. And in both cases, book burning or book writing, we are echoing the schism between the South and the North, the kingdom of Judah in the South, the kingdom of Israel in the North, hundreds of years of parallel ideologies, territories, some symbiosis, some collaboration, but also different tracks, one silencing the other. And eventually, the book that we are referencing the good book, the Bible, in all its permutations, is written by primarily the southern agenda, Judah, not Israel, which means some books get written, and by being written, they silence other narratives. And some books get burnt so that their message gets silenced. And some information never makes it to any scroll or page at all. And the tellers are the ones silenced. There's so much we don't know. We're going to work with what we got. So both these narratives, Judah and Israel, Jeremiah, Josiah, are bringing us not only to understand history, but the purpose, as Evelyn so beautifully put in the chat, and thank you, Evelyn, to be together and study on reflection of Judaism, past and present, and dare I say, the future. How can we prevent censorship? How can we prevent ideas from being silenced? How can we understand where we come from the schism of South and North, the different ideology of particular and universal, expansive, inclusive, and what can we learn about the pluralism and the power of multiple narratives that can coexist? Never easy and not easy now. So that's our big initiative, and that's our program for today. I'm glad you're all here. We're going to dive right in. We're going to look at a few texts, stop for some questions, and go from there. So, Taylor, would you like to share the study sheet on our screen, and we can look at source number 2, and then we're going to go to source number 3 and do it slowly. Thank you. I want to do it a little bigger. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's tired, and eyes are dim, midsummer, not even mid. Maybe a little, yeah, I think you're figuring it out, how to make sure we see the whole text. Bingo. Thank you, Taylor. This is from Molly Morris, who wrote this article on the first Jewish book burning about chapter 36 of Jeremiah. And you can hit the link later in your own document to go there. And she writes the following: book burning has been used to suppress dissent and protect totalitarian regimes throughout history. From the early 13th century, when Pope Gregory IX directed King Louis IX of France to burn every copy of the Talmud in Paris, to the mid-20th century, when Stalin burned the entire Judaica collection in the capital of the Jewish Oblast of Russia, Jewish texts have been prime targets. Unfortunately, Jews themselves have not been guiltless of this crime. Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed was deemed heretical by some Jewish factions and burnt in France in 1233. In 1954, the Union of Orthodox Rabbis of the United States and Canada burned the books of Mordechai Kaplan, the co-founder of the Reconstructionist movement, at a public event in New York City. The first recorded instance of Jewish book burning occurs in Jeremiah 36. Got a gloss for a moment on 1954 in New York City. I don't remember the details of the story. I remember learning it many years ago when I was studying at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where Mordechai Kaplan was teacher, before he veered, I guess, left and became a Reconstructionist. And it's mostly his theology that was so radical that rankled the more traditional rabbis. And I don't remember the details of the burning. I remember reading about it and getting the details. But it's just astounding that this is the 1950s. And we have to remember that the Rosenbergs were executed at around the same time. And so there are ways in which silencing people, silencing ideas, silencing prophecies is part of our DNA. We have to be aware of it and be conscious of it. Maybe today we use other ways of silencing. We're canceling people as opposed to burning their books. But that fear of voices that disturb the peace, so to speak, is something we're familiar with. Now, I want to go back in history to the very specific moment in which Jeremiah, prophet of Jerusalem, speaks up. And so this is source number 3 in our sheets. And the Hebrew is above, and we're going to scroll down, thank you, Taylor, all the way to the English. This is a very famous illustration of Jeremiah and Baruch. is described by Gustav Dore, romantic German depictions from the 19th century. So here we are. I'm going to read through it because really there's so much in this text. And it's been a while since in this group we really read through a biblical chapter. It's long, so I'm going to skip some parts. In the 4th year of King Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, from God. 4th year of King Jehoiakim, we know where it is more or less. It's also the 1st year of King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian, and it's most likely 601 BCE, according to some scholars. Maybe a couple years, maybe 604. God speaks to Jeremiah as God has done before. And notice that we're also curious about the process. How do these prophecies become text, right? Who writes them down? Jeremiah is one of the rare exceptions where we really see the process from divine inspiration, whatever the hell that means, to word on a page. Get a scroll, says God, and write upon it all the words that I've spoken to you concerning Israel and Judah. He's talking to both kingdoms and all the other nations from the time I first spoke to you in the days of King Josiah, about 20 years earlier to this day. So basically, this is the time to gather the memoir, the collected writings of Jeremiah 20 years later, assuming those are remembered. Perhaps, says God, says Jeremiah, when the house of Judah hear all of the disasters that I intend to bring upon them, they will turn back from their wicked ways, and I will pardon their iniquity and their sin. This is a purposeful text. It's to get people to change their minds. So Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Neriah, and Baruch wrote down in the scroll of Jeremiah's dictation all the words that God had spoken. Jeremiah instructed Baruch, I am in hiding. I cannot go to the house of God. He's in hiding because there's already public, political, royal word against him. He's been already talking politics in a way that the king is worried about. And so he's in a bunker. But you, Baruch, go and read aloud God's words from the scroll that you wrote at my dictation to all the people in the house of God on a fast day, meaning they'll all be there. Thus you will also be reading them to all the Judeans who come in from the towns. Perhaps their entreaty will be accepted by God if they turn back from their wicked ways. For great is the anger and wrath with which God has threatened this people. Baruch, son of Neriah, did just as the prophet Jeremiah had instructed him, and reading God's words from the scroll in the house of God in the 9th month, on the 5th year of King Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah, all the people in Jerusalem and all the people coming from Judah proclaimed a fast before God in Jerusalem. We can say more about which fast it is, but never mind for now. It was then that Baruch, in the chamber of Gemariah, son of Shaphan, the scribe, in the upper court, near the new gateway of the house of God, very specific, read the words of Jeremiah from the scroll to all the people in the house of God, right? For those of you, wherever city you're living in, you've seen them standing on the subway stairs. You've heard the preachers. You have read or heard the big speakers of the day proclaim, and finding where and when are we going to be listening and paying attention. What's the main stage? Baruch ben Neriah is doing it courtesy of the Shaphan scribe family. It's a very important family of intellectuals in the Jerusalem court. Shaphan has an important role to play. We'll see that in a moment. It already goes back several decades. And so he's got this patronage of the elite. So there he is, reading from the scroll of Jeremiah to the people. Michiah, son of Gemariah, son of Shaphan, heard all the words of God read from the scroll. Even though he's from the elite that sponsored the event, he might be of different minds. So he went down to the king's palace, just a short walk away, to the chamber of the scribe. There he found all the officials in session. Elishama the scribe, Delaiah, son of Shemaiah, Elnatan, the son of Achbor, Gemariah, son of Shaphan, Zedekiah, son of Hananiah, and all the other officials. And Michiah told them Wow, guys, I just came back from the temple. Guess what I heard? Wow, hot off the press. All the words that God read from the scroll. Chia told him, or he heard what Baruch read in the hearing of all the people. Then all the officials sent Yehudi, son of Netanyah, son of Shelemiah, son of Cushi, to say to Baruch, take that scroll from which you read to the people and come along with us. Not exactly house arrest, but sort of detained. Baruch took the scroll and came to them. They said, sit down and read it to us. And so he read it to them, right? You understand the bureaucracy here. We're going from one to the other to the other. And when they heard all those words that Baruch read from Jeremiah, they turned to each other in fear. And they said to Baruch, we must report all this to the king now. And we don't know what's in the scroll, except if you want to go back and read Jeremiah, the previous 20 chapters, then you will get it, right? This is chapter 36. A lot of Jeremiah's prophecies have been already recorded. It's theoretically, in retrospect, this is the first time they all get written down. And they questioned Baruch further, tell us how you wrote down all these words that he spoke. He answered them, he himself recited all those words to me, and I would write them down in the scroll in ink. First description we have of how the prophetic process is channeled through a scribe, through dictation. The only part we don't know is what does the prophet hear exactly? Do you hear God? Is it like, how does that work? That part we don't know. The official said to Baruch, go into hiding. Not just Jeremiah, you. Don't let anyone know where you are. You are holding dynamite. Right? And again, we don't exactly know what's in the scroll, but we assume that it's Jeremiah telling the king not to go into an alliance with the Egyptians, to wait for the Babylonians, not to declare national prominence, but to be subdued and to take the yoke of Babylon. And that was considered political heresy, not so much religious heresy. And he also keeps telling the people, if you don't change your ways, however you are worshiping different gods, however you are taking political sides with a nationalist regime, all is going to go up in smoke unless you change your ways. And that is socio-political dogma that the court just doesn't want the people to hear. The propaganda machine wants to tighten what is being publicly proclaimed. And even though some people heard it in the temple, they want to stop it before it becomes too wide, like wildfire. Go hide, Baruch, you, Jeremiah. Meanwhile, they went to the king in the court, after leaving the scroll in the chamber of the scribe Elishama. And they reported all these matters to the king. The king sent Yehudi to get the scroll, and he fetched it from the chamber of the scribe Elishama. Yehudi read it to the king and all the officials who were in attendance. Right? Notice the bureaucracy. All those names are there. This is like a official report of who's implicated here. Now it's winter in Jerusalem, the 9th month, right? The 7th is Tishrei, so we're in the winter. It's cold. The king was sitting in his winter house. The fire was burning in the brazier before him. And every time Yehudi read 3 or 4 columns, the king would cut it up with a scribe's knife and throw it into the fire until the entire scroll of Jeremiah, of God's words, the only copy, was consumed by the fire in the brazier. I want you to imagine for a moment the faces of the courtiers, their expressions, what they're feeling. Right? First book burning in our history, officially. Yet the king and all his courtiers who heard all these words showed no fear and did not tear their garments, says the book of Jeremiah. Moreover, Elnathan, Delaiah, and Gemarian begged the king not to burn the scroll, but he would not listen to them. The king ordered Yerachmiel, the king's son, and Serachiah, the son of Azriel, and Shelemiah, son of Abdil, to arrest the scribe Baruch and the prophet Jeremiah, but God hid them. The word of God came to Jeremiah after the king had burned the scroll containing the words that Baruch had written at Jeremiah's dictation. Get yourself another scroll and write upon it the same words that were in the first scroll and that were burned by the king of Judah. And concerning the Yakim of Judah, you shall say in the next scroll, so says God, you burnt the scroll, saying, how dare you write it? that the king of Babylon will come and destroy the land and cause human and animals to cease from it? Assuredly, says God concerning King Jehoiakim of Judah, he shall not have any of his line sitting on the throne of David, and his own corpse shall be left exposed to the heat by day and by cold by night. And I will punish him and his offspring and his courtiers for their iniquity. I will bring on them and the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all the citizenry of Judah the disasters of which I have warned them. They would not listen. So Jeremiah got another scroll and gave it to the scribe Baruch, son of Neriah. And at Jeremiah's dictation, he wrote it, the entire text of the scroll that King Jehoiakim of Judah had burnt, and more of the like was added. That's a really interesting finale here. Everything that was burnt was written, and okay, so isn't that an amazing text? Again, whoever wrote Jeremiah shortly after or way after, whoever's agenda this is to tell the story of the burning, but the persistence of the text doesn't tell us exactly what's in the scroll. The assumption is that we know what's in it. It's the chapters before and after in Jeremiah. And it is the political decision to go with Babylon, not with Egypt. It is the prohibition on idolatry and injustice. It's the critique against the king and the suppression of truth. And the king's suppression of truth does not last. The story gets around. The truth is stronger. Right? The pen is often mightier than the sword. And that's what we have here. So we're going to come back for a moment to what's happening. Many have written about Jeremiah 36, not only because of its history of the production of prophetic texts, but also what it's telling us about the evolution of ideology and the ability of the Judean southern kingdom to contain narratives by silencing many others. Jeremiah is not of the north, he's of the south. A lot of today is about southern characters, but it has the implications on the silencing of the voices of Israel from the north. So I want to read a little bit of the commentary from one of the books many of you know I love and have been very inspired by Jacob Wright, a contemporary biblical scholar from Emory down in Atlanta, whose book How the Bible Began contains a lot of rich information. I've recommended it several times. I want to read a couple of paragraphs from it, and then we'll take a little pause for some comments. The Judean kingdom, and he's basically reframing what we just read. I sort of want to have it echo. The Judean kingdom is in its final throes, and Jehoiakim is on the throne. His father, Josiah, is famous for finding a copy of the Torah and instituting religious reforms. More about that in a moment. In his son's reign, however, Judah has become a vassal to Babylon, and now it was looking to Egypt for the right moment to break free. In doing so, the palace has to contend with major obstacles, and one of them is a prophet, Jeremiah. He's loudly protesting the state's policies as they pertain to both international and internal relations. Our account, 36, begins with the scribe Baruch memorizing Jeremiah's prophecies in a scroll. The prophet then instructs him to take the document and read it to the inhabitants of Judah. And I'll skip the verse that we just heard. Concerned to make the scroll available to as many as possible, Baruch goes to the temple when the inhabitants of Judah's cities were coming to Jerusalem for a public fast. After he reads the scroll in public, a smaller circle of scribes and officials instructs Baruch and Jeremiah to lie low and hide the scroll. It is wintertime, and when members of the royal cabinet bring the scroll to the court, the king is sitting before a fire and has his scribe read it to him and the princes who were present. As they proceed, he uses the scribe's scalpel to slice off columns, casting them piece by piece in the flames. When they had read and burnt the entire document, Jehoiakim orders his men to arrest Jeremiah and Baruch. It would be difficult to imagine a more graphic illustration of state censorship. On the eve of destruction, a monarch warms himself by burning a book, not because he lacks fuel for his fire, but because its contents challenge his rule and political agenda. The only reason we still have Jeremiah's prophecies, this legend claims, is because Jeremiah and Baruch were in hiding and able to produce a new scroll, which they concealed from the court. And here's the final few thoughts from Wright about what this moment is about. Knowledge is power. And throughout history, rulers have gone to great lengths to control the flow of information. Sociologists and historians study this phenomena under the rubric of Wissenmonopol, Wissenmonopol, a German term that means the monopoly of knowledge. Modern democratic societies recognize the importance of transparency, freedom of information, and open access, at least in theory. Likewise, the scribes who shaped the biblical corpus knew how crucial it was to check the power of the crown and communal authorities. In the present chapter, we consider how they applied the principle of transparency to the knowledge that was the special preserve of palace, prophet, and priest. And here Wright makes a leap. This is a little bit later in the chapter in which he talks about this incident. And this connects us to the next part of today's session about Josiah, Jehoiakim's father, and the writing of the book that will become the Bible, not the burning. And we start with a big question. Who wrote the Bible? Right? Who wrote the chapter that we just read? Whose agenda was it to write the chapter that we just read? The Jeremiah's or the Jehoiakim? The kings, royal scribes who preserved the traditions, or the renegade prophets who wanted their truth to persevere? Many answers to that. But let's just see what Wright is writing about here. Who wrote the Bible? That is a question taken on in the best-selling book bearing this title, also on our reading list. Its author, Richard Elliott Friedman, argues that the most extensive source in the biblical narrative was written either by the prophet Jeremiah or his scribal secretary, Baruch ben Neriah, or both working in tandem. So chapter 36 of Jeremiah is not just a story. It might be the story of the story. Now, there are many scholars who disagree with Friedman and don't think that it's necessarily Jeremiah, but that is an opinion that is shared by other scholars in other traditions as well. But as we have seen and will continue to see, the Bible betrays very different views of the nation's history, and many writers had a hand in the composition of this work. Some of the scribes may be mentioned among the host of names found in the book of Jeremiah, but for all practical intents and purposes, the biblical authors are anonymous. Even in the case of Baruch, we cannot say much more about his life, social location, or political agenda. The anonymity of the biblical writing stands in stark contrast to the single-authored works of Greece, such as the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides, the authors of the national narrative, main text that Wright gives the Bible as we have it, intentionally concealed their identity in an effort to focus their audience's attention on the representative figures they portrayed in their accounts. Figures such as Abraham and Sarah, Joshua and Rahab, Josiah and Huldah. The Bible is nothing if not a revisionary work. It grew as multiple textual memories were compiled. Later, it was redacted from new perspectives, and thereafter the process continued in the form of commentary and retelling. Let's pause for a moment and we can unshare, Taylor. Thank you. What we're talking about here, we started off with the story of Jeremiah and the king burning the scroll. And now we're going to take a step back and look at the king's father, King Josiah, who writes the scroll. In both cases, we're asking the question of how far can the power of authorities truly suppress, silence, hide the prophetic, the subversive, the voices of truth that will emerge like weeds through cracks, despite attempts to silence them. And this is going to connect in just a moment to the south-north Judah-Israel divide. But I'm pretty sure that this is hitting your own hearts and your own minds and your own thoughts in ways that speak to your own experience, your own histories, um, in whatever countries you grew up or living in right now. So I want to open this up for just really just 5, 6 minutes. We'll have more time for questions after. Where is this hitting you? And I'm asking you more for questions than reflections, either clarification or something that this ignites in you vis-a-vis our story of the South and the North, Judah and Israel, those different narratives. Okay, so take a second. If you have a question, feel free to unmute, and please keep it as brief as you can. We have time for a couple. Harriet, was that a hand? Okay, so feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay. The question I have is, all right, so it's put into the person of Jeremiah, who is a prophet, but the content of what is being censored has political implications for the state, right? Which giant power, Babylon or Egypt, are you as king going to align with? And so that troubles me. Because when you first read this, I thought, oh my God, this is like an echo of Moses being upset and smashing the tablets, right?
And it absolutely
But
is.
that was over a religious matter, right? That it's not a political. Well, maybe there was maybe that's my question. To what extent can you separate the political from the religious in the heart of Israel and its history? Yeah.
Great question. I'm just going to let it sit there because the fact is we can't really separate them. Just like today, the political is prophetic and the religious is civic, and whether you're talking about Christian nationalism or religious Zionism, or you're talking about Islamic fundamentalism, right now there is a war going on in half the world over issues that are very unclear between the religiosity and the politics, between territory and tribal truths. So that's exactly my point, right? What we're looking at is a combination of both. And that is the role of a prophet very often. It's not relegated to how do you worship God? It's asking the question, what are the values by which your society is running? So thank you for clarifying that. That's exactly what we're talking
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, Evelyn, please.
I'm wondering, what about the role of the priests? Where are the priests here?
Interesting. So the priests are basically the functionaries of the temple. Their jobs are to make sure that the machine runs on time. Their job is to make sure that the sacrifices are delivered, that the gods are pleased, that the people are paying their taxes. Their job is not to be the intellectual elite. Okay? I don't, we can talk about examples. You know what? Okay, I'll take a risk and I'll say this. I was asked to speak a few weeks ago at a very prominent synagogue for Pride Month as a openly gay rabbi, da da da. But I was told in no uncertain terms, do not talk about Israel Palestine. Your job is to make us feel good that we are dealing with pride and we got rainbow flags and we're accepting people like you on our pulpit, which was not the case X amount of years ago. We don't, our community is divided and Israel Palestine is divisive. And we know you met with Mamdani. Don't talk about it. Don't mention it. We don't want to hear anything but Israel Palestine. Only pride. To which I said, well, I'll do my best. I am your guest and I will respect your rules. And frankly, I don't think accepting the other, tolerating the other, opening our hearts and our rainbows stops at somebody's sexual identity. I'm an activist for peace, and it's about dialogue, and it's about sitting on the shoulders of the LGBT activists who are sitting on the shoulders of the feminist activists who are sitting on the shoulders of the abolition activists, and we who are fighting for peace and human rights for all, sitting on all those shaky shoulders. So I don't want to stop. I don't think it's responsible to stop. I will say something within the realms of respect. And they weren't very happy, but I had to do my thing. And some people were very grateful. Some people were pissed. So what are you going to do? Right? So the priests are the ones who want to make sure that we say the Shema and say the Kaddish and do the Shabbos candles and do the funerals and do the bar mitzvahs and don't ruffle any feathers, please. Easy on the prophetic truth. Our moral injury is bad enough with Shabbos. Next, page 54, please rise. Rabbis in the room, sorry. So I think the priests, to your question, Evelyn, were the functionaries that made sure the system was working until the system stopped working for any number of reasons. Thank you. Here's to priests and prophets working together to provide the leadership we need. Elizabeth, you get the last word before we move on and back in time about 30 years.
Well, it's a question, and I apologize in advance if I'm not able to articulate it very clearly. But the idea, which is not new to us, with the Bible Belt, but the idea that the Bible is nothing if not a revisionary work is troubling to me. I mean, I understand that it can revise over time, but I'm wondering, like, what are the truths of the book? I mean, what can we grab onto from the Bible that we can say, oh, wasn't just somebody's political agenda to change it 200 years later? Or was the story of Ruth, really true? Does it matter? And it doesn't matter if the Bible's really just a book of fiction. When we at least traditionally, we pin so much on the Bible and what it means.
Whew. I'm going to leave that question, if you don't mind, Elizabeth, to our 3 p.m. session in 15 minutes. But that's a whopper, and I want to get there. And I will just say that the word myth or mythos in Greece means the big story. It doesn't mean the fiction that today we align with the word myth. It means the big story, mythos. And whether that's Zeus and Aphrodite, whether that is Ra and Tut, whether that is Moses or Cinderella, I don't really care. I'm personally not interested in the verification of the historical authenticity of the Bible. I think truth is something we hold on to as the sacred alignment with the values that matter to us. The justice, the love, the history, the ability to straddle our way between different ideologies. And the Bible, as a wonderful museum with a curator and agenda, contains many different rooms. And there's a thread that runs through them. Different people might hold on to different threads. People will read different truths. Abolitionists use the Bible to demand an end to slavery. Slave owners use the Bible to perpetuate slavery. Racists and anti-racists use the Bible. Gays and homophobic religious leaders use the Bible. People who say the Holy Land is all for the Jews, people who say the Holy Land is for all people, use the Bible. So we can use it, and it doesn't have one source. What I want to show right now is that it contains multiple narratives, including, most important to this course, the voice of the North and the voice of the South, the voice of the more expansive, the voice of the more exclusive. And it's primarily the voice of the more exclusive, the more closed-minded, the Judean, that will become the curatorial voice of the Bible. But we who listen deeper and dig hear the other narratives as well. And then the question of what is the truth gets a little tricky, which is why there are so many books about the book. and more keep being written every day. So thank you for those excellent questions. I'm going to continue us on our journey because we only have a few minutes to just touch upon this issue of the book burning and the book banning, and then we'll have some more time for Q&A. I'm moving us to page 8 and source 5. And if we already met King Jehoiakim of Judah, known as the book burner, we're now going to meet his dad, Josiah. We're not going to read the whole chapter, just a few verses from here. So we're going back in time. Jeremiah is already the prophet. He served 4 kings. Josiah was just 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Yedidah, daughter of Abadiah of Bazkat. It's important for business reasons. And he did what was pleasing to Yahweh, and he followed all the ways of his forefather David, did not deviate right or left as his father had, and he absolutely became a fill-in-the-blank, Orthodox, obedient to Yahweh, Jewish. The word Jewish doesn't exist yet, Judean. Fast forward, he collects a lot of money to redo the temple and do it up, because it hasn't been in good shape. It was closed up because they were worshiping other gods. And while they were doing construction, they find, that's the story, a book. The high priest Hilkiah, this goes back to Evelyn's question, he's in charge of the construction, the edifice project, said to the scribe Shaphan, that's the father of the scribe we just met in Jehoiakim's day, I have found a scroll of the teaching in the house of God. Oh my God. And Hilkiah gave the scroll to Shaphan, the scribe, in charge of the books, and who read it. And then he brings it to the king. And when the king, Josiah, hears the words of the scroll of the teaching of the Torah, he rents his clothes in mourning and grief, because what's probably in that scroll are the warnings that say, if you don't do what we told you, or be obedient to Yahweh and do the rules and do this and this and that, you will all burn. And so there's a whole process by which they verify the scroll. Huldah, the prophetess, gives them the okay. We studied this a few months ago. And then the king, when I'm fast forwarding, you can see the rest in the chapter if you want. The king went up to the house of God, the temple, together with the entire citizenry of Judah, and the whole protocol, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the priests, and the prophets, all the people, young and old. And they read to them out loud the entire text of the covenant scroll that had been found in the house of God. And the king stood by the pillar and solemnized the covenant before God, that they would follow God and observe God's commandments, injunctions, and laws with their heart and soul. They would fulfill all the terms of this covenant as inscribed upon the scroll. It was either ancient and discovered, or most likely they wrote it. And now comes the anti-covenant. Then the king ordered the high priest Hilkiah and the priests of the second rank and the guards of the threshold to bring out of the temple of God, of Yahweh's temple, all the objects made by the previous kings, including his father, made for Baal, the great god of the land, and Asherah, the great goddess of the land, and all the hosts of heaven. He burnt those outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and he removed the ashes to Bet-El. Bet-El is the kingdom of the north. That's interesting. And then there was an altar in Bet-El, right out there, in the kingdom of the north, and the shrine made by Jeroboam, son of Nevat, the first king of the north, who caused Israel to sin. That altar too, and the shrine as well, he tore down. He burned down the shrine and beat it to dust and burnt the sacred post. Sacred post is the English translation. That too is a type of silencing of the Asherah, the great goddess, probably a huge tree where the goddess was worshipped. Here it's just a post, and it gets burnt down. Boom. So this is the third burning in our chapter. And this time we're not burning the holy book, and we're not silencing the words of Jeremiah. We are burning and destroying the other gods and goddesses that our ancestors worshiped. Right? This is Josiah destroying the gods that his own father had put in the temple. Some of them to the Jewish deities and some of them to other deities. So the iconoclast moment of destroying icons is depicted here in another way. Josiah is the one who created the reform, the religious war that silenced other oppositions to Yahweh and silenced the north. And you see it alluded to by the altar of Jeroboam that is being demolished as well. Now, the example that I can give you that I've given before is that imagine, and again, I don't know all of you in this room, but I know most of you, and I would imagine we are on the liberal, progressive, feminist, humanist, queer-friendly, politically side of life. But if Chabad or another ultra-Orthodox Jewish voice would come into this room and say, this is all heresy, Amichai, you may not teach anymore. None of this teaching is legit. The only teaching that's legit is the Orthodox, male-driven, male-only Judaism that we adhere by, and all the rest of this reform liberal crap is forbidden. You understand what I'm talking about. That's what Josiah is doing. Josiah's reform is, I found the ancient book that says from now on, it's only Jerusalem, only the house of Aaron. It's only our way and Yahweh and no other way. There'll be no temples in the north. There'll be no other gods. There'll be no other ways of worshiping our people. All other descent silenced. That's Josiah, Jehoiakim's father. And the Josiah reform becomes a very famous and problematic moment that we're trying to make our way through. Good guys, bad guys. Good reform, bad reform. Clamping down on the alternative narratives, including those of the North, or creating the narrative that would create the Judaism we know now. Kind of both and. So I want to read one more source with you and a half, and then we're going to end just at 3 in time for your many questions. I'm seeing your puzzled brows. So I want to look at source 6 with you. This is Professor Tamar Kaminkowski, one of the experts of biblical critique. The image that I've put next to her is no distant history. This is very recent. This is the burning of Harry Potter in Tennessee in 2022. Okay, that too is on the attack by some voices in our midst. Not just because it's so literature or Rowling is problematic, because of witchcraft. In the second book of Kings, 22-23, exactly what we just read, a series of radical reforms is described that King Josiah enacted during the latter part of the 7th century BCE. These reforms included the abolishment of all places of worship to foreign gods in the lands that Josiah controlled, the destruction of high places and altar sites to Yahweh that were outside of Jerusalem, i.e. the north, and as consequences, the demotion of the Levitical priest. So there's a structural change here as well. The text tells us that Josiah executed these reforms as a result of the discovery of a scroll in the temple, which indicated that sacrifices should be offered at only one central place. Most biblical scholars believe that this discovered scroll was an early form of what we now know as the 5th book of the Bible, Deuteronomy, because the book by and large advocates the same program that Josiah enacted, primarily with Jerusalem as the only place for worship. There is no consensus regarding who wrote Deuteronomy, but there's general agreement that the program it advocated includes centralization of all worship in Jerusalem, support for the monarchy, but with limited powers, a focus on Torah as the locus for the relationship between God and Israel, and a concept of a more transcendent God than is described elsewhere in Torah, less imminent, more far. The authors of Deuteronomy placed their theological, social, and political ideologies in the mouth of Moses to give legitimacy to their reforms. In this way, they were able to interact with all the tradition as it stood in their time, to reinterpret earlier traditions, and to innovate while grounding the new in the old. So what Josiah is doing is very likely with his court, creating a new text that sounds like it's an old text to further his ideology, which was centralizing the Judean Jerusalem type of Judaism and silencing all other dissent. His son will burn Jeremiah's prophet. Josiah writes the book, 2 different ways, trying to establish a single narrative. And the final quote for today will help us bring it up from a contemporary biblical historical scholar by the name of Andada Geizal Fuchs, who writes, "The history of Israel and Judah is selectively retold, with deliberate omissions and additions, reflecting a certain emphasis. While the northern kingdom is negatively portrayed throughout the Bible, the southern kingdom is positively evaluated. The Jerusalem temple cult is legitimized and asserted as representing the only accurate religion, functioning in this community as a discourse of power." So basically, the Judaism we know, the Bible we know, is from the south, from Jehoiakim, from Josiah, from the scribes that came after, silencing the prophets, the north, the dissenting texts. It still exists, just like the second scroll of Jeremiah also exists. And famously, the story of Moses breaking the tablets that one of you alluded to, after the first set is broken because of the golden calf, the Torah we have is the second set. That too might be something about scribal traditions that tell us that things are not only the first time, they're the second and the third and the fourth, and there are many, many revisions. More to say about that. I'm just going to end with this very short quote from those of you who know Edmund Jabez's book, The Book of Questions, which is a cryptic and important, work of philosophy. And he says, "The book is as old as fire, as water. It is the memory of the desert where the word found its stone. You cannot burn the book, because the book is made of the very ash that remains after the fire." You cannot burn the book. You cannot silence the truth. It can hide, it can fight, but it will come out. That's my hope. So with that, friend, we are officially going to take another deep breath. Say thank you to King Josiah and King Jehoiakim. May they rest in peace. And to Jeremiah and Baruch and all the other prophets, to the rabbis and professors and biblical scribes and commentators, and to all of you for going on this journey that explores 2 historical moments of the suppression of Scripture and how the truth lives on. This is a way to talk about the South, North, Judah, Israel divide and understand our role in digging up the truth. So thank you for joining me for this part of this session. We'll be back again here in July, and I'm excited to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your questions. May we be part of the paradigm that celebrates plurality and complexity and minimizes the hard-handed approach of less. And I wish you all peaceful and kind days. Have a good week. Taylor, thank you for holding the space for us. Thank you all for joining. Shavua Tov.